This is a September 12th meeting of the Gloucester EDIC. It is taking place as a remote meeting. So let me read the following. Consistent with Chapter 107 of the Acts of 2022, this meeting will be conducted by remote participation. The public may not physically attend this meeting, but every effort will be made to allow the public to view and listen to the meeting in real time and participate when necessary. This meeting is recorded by video and audio in accordance with state open meeting law, consistent with the governor's orders suspending certain provisions of the open meeting law and banning gatherings of more than 10 people. This meeting will be conducted by remote participation. If you are calling in on a phone, you can press *9 to request to speak. If you're watching on a computer or device, there's a raise a hand button that you can use to request to speak. Please use either of these options during oral communications to be recognized to speak. And with that, I call this meeting to order. So let's see, we'll take attendance and hope that some others will join. Weston and Sampson team, we've had a couple members that had to travel at the last minute and others that were participating remotely. So, but we did want to finish this off and get it in our hands and get moving on the analysis. So who is here? Jerry Oppenheim.
I am here.
Yes. Patty Naggs.
I am here.
Tom Belf is here. And then as others come along, we'll add them. We'll put on hold the review of the meeting minutes from our July, since there isn't currently a quorum. So with that, Sue, I'll turn it over to you to walk us through sort of the major conclusions and findings from this pretty comprehensive feasibility assessment, and point us sort of where, the key questions and issues are as we further explore, the report, in the months following.
Okay. So I think what I will do is can everyone hear me okay? I'm in a big room and I feel like it's echoey. Okay. Okay. I will just do some of the background. I will do my best summarizing the infrastructure stuff. Jeff cannot attend tonight, but he and I have been working together. I'll do my best to sort of walk through that in the report with you all. And I will let Jean talk through the market analysis, including the pro forma. And then we can bring up the recommendations at the end. And I think, can I share a screen? When I start to talk about the site analysis, I can bring up some of the maps to show you what we had done. So, I'll just start with some basic background. So we were hired to do a site suitability development capacity analysis for a potential extension of Condelin Road. There had been a previous analysis in 2010 where some initial investigations were done to look at, could you build a road back there and how much development capacity could you get? And so they did some initial road layouts and they determined that, one of them, I think it was road layout B, was the, most, feasible. And when you see our plans, we use that road layout to, sort of formulate all of our analyses. They did do like a layout, like a lot layout based on the existing zoning, and the existing zoning is residential. So sort of like, and we can kind of show you that in a second too, is that they kind of said, how many lots could you get? And there's about 36 acres in total. And they were looking at like how many lots you could get, but the analysis didn't really get into some of the, site constraints. And, I know everyone here is really familiar with this site. So you will understand that there's some pretty significant site constraints, that kind of have to be factored into, what your potential development capacity could be. And so, one of the big, the big three were sort of like the wetlands, like there are wetlands out there. And so there are regulations related to the wetlands, which, could potentially reduce the amount of buildable area. The depth to bedrock was, something that affected the entire site, right? So like that's going to be an additional cost, no matter, where you want to do development along this like steady area. and the other one is the slope. And so we just, and I'm going to pull up this map in a second, but, we looked at more than 15% versus less than 15% slope because, in talking to our internal guys who do site development, like that's, it's not a perfect measure, but, anything, above 15%, like adds a lot of additional cost to it and, really constrains what you can do out there. Less than that, it's still, can be still difficult, but, it was a good sort of midpoint, where it helped us to identify areas that are more appropriate for development and less appropriate for development. So let me bring up that map. All right.
Let me acknowledge that Taylor has joined.
Sorry, I was on some other way. I don't know. I had to update things. Sorry. Here.
Welcome.
Thanks. I heard most of what Susan was saying in the beginning. Is she kind of paused now?
I am paused, just pulling up the maps. I'm just trying to figure
Okay.
out best way to kind of do this. And
You were just shocked that I got on. You were
No.
stopping everything.
I've shared the screen, so you'll be able to pull
yeah,
up the presentation.
all right. Sorry, I'm not in my office, and that's a little bit making this a little less seamless as it maybe could be. And I'm gonna have to. All right, so all right, so we can see this now. And let's see, I don't know, Jim or Jean, do you have an, like, I'm just trying to maximize the view of my graphic right here.
We're seeing a corner of it.
Yeah, I know, I'm trying to.
Right.
There we go. All right. Is everyone no longer seeing the corner and maybe seeing a little more of the
Yeah, it's better now. Yeah, that's good.
All right. So we talked about, the layout B of the proposed extension to Condolin Road, and that's what this is right here. I don't know if can you see my cursor as I'm dragging it along the screen here? Yeah. So that's layout B. It includes sort of like a access way here. That's what we used. And, I talked a little bit about sort of like that lot layout plan they had done in 2010. And that's, I don't know if you can kind of see, there's a lot going on the graphic, but I don't know, it's kind of a good comprehensive way to, kind of look at everything out there. Like those are the lots they kind of looked at in 2010. They're sort of like 1 acre each residential shaped lots. And we didn't recommend a new lot layout because, when Jean will go through this a little bit, is that, you don't really know what the folks that are going to redevelopment will need. And, we did learn that having, some flexibility and not necessarily like a big building that's, 200,000 square feet is maybe not the way that this is going to go. And it might be smaller buildings of 50 to 100,000 square feet. So, we thought, let's leave it kind of, we define the study area, but the future development will define, what the actual lot layouts will be, because there will be a rezoning required. Like I said, it's still zoned residential, even though the lots that are just, I guess that's northwest of it are, along Collin Road, that's got that industrial zoning. And, our recommendation would be, as part of this, is you work with the town to, rezone this for industrial, if you are going to make public infrastructure investments out there. So also mentioned that we did sort of an initial, desktop analysis of some of the wetland areas. And that's what these areas are. So these are sort of identified wetland resources within the study area that either have been identified or, have been identified as potentially being wetland regulatory resources. And so we map them and, to be conservative, and we kind of assume that those, regulatory areas might present some site constraints. We also sort of drew a line around the, areas with less than 15% grade, right? And so that represents this like this black line right here. So like, you know, that grabs, you know, the less steep area of this whole, you know, study area to sort of, you know, help you kind of understand like where the most potential is or where the development can happen with the least additional cost to development for, you know, addressing the issues, you know, related to the steep slopes. And then we kind of just grabbed a couple of areas here that, you know, both were outside of the wetland resource areas and they were, you know, less than 50% steep slopes. So those are sort of our, you know, recommendation of, you know, if you're going to phase this is probably a good place to start with phase one. You know, if you're going to phase this, you know, making sure that the infrastructure serves these areas is probably a good first step. So not to say that there's not additional development capacity, or, you know, sort of initial analysis, you know, led us to some areas that, you know, might be sort of like the, you know, first in sites. The other thing that we did, and I'm going to have Jim talk about this a little bit, because this is also related to the potential infrastructure investment that could be made. And we'll get to some of the information, the hard numbers in the report in a little bit, and we'll share those with you as well. But a couple of things that we sort of recommend as ways to proceed is to look at the area not as like just a bunch of separate lots, but to look at this whole area as, you know, a potential for doing some master planning. And one of the components of those master planning is how you're going to address stormwater. All of those site constraints I talked about, like especially the topography and the depth of bedrock, make, you know, addressing your stormwater difficult, complicated, and expensive. So if the EDIC can, you know, look at that as a potential like public infrastructure investment as well, rather than, you know, telling each individual developer, you just need to figure it out on your own because the permitting is complicated and takes a long time and it's expensive. You know, if you design it ahead of time, maybe you build it ahead of time. And, you know, like we talked about, I think in a couple of meetings before, like this does give some additional complexity to the whole deal because it means that like someone has to manage that. And so that's like, I guess, a question that, you know, EDIC has to kind of explore in the future is, you know, is that potential, you know, reducing those costs and reducing that permitting time, you know, interesting enough to the EDIC that you'd be willing to sort of take that on. You know, we thought you might be because you're so, you know, you're proponents of this development, and you know, as we're trying to figure out you know, how it can happen, where it can happen, how much it can happen, you know, stormwater was one of the things where we thought like here's an opportunity for the EDIC to, you know, support the development. So Jim, would you like to talk a little bit about, you know, the approach, you know, master planning stormwater for the site?
Sure.
Yeah, okay. I didn't see you on there, so I only can see like 3 people right now. So good. Okay.
That's okay. So basically, you know, working from this map, you can see there, as Sue pointed out, there are a couple of areas, one about 2.5 acres and the other one 3 acres, that are probably the easiest areas to develop. And you can see next to the one that's 3 acres in the lower right-hand corner, that there is roughly a square shape. That's perhaps where you would put a stormwater basin. And it would be roughly, as it happens, it would be roughly sized to accept stormwater from those 2, you know, 5.5 acre development areas and the roadway. So if you, in advance, like Sue was mentioning, if in advance you designed and built the stormwater system, then potential developers wouldn't have to figure that out on their own. They wouldn't have to come up with that cost on their own, but you could roll that cost into the cost of the land or the cost of tenancy or whatever, so that you could get reimbursed for that. And you could also include the cost of operating the stormwater BMPs. So each of these, you can see that 1 square shape in the lower right? That has sort of a certain coloration to it. There are 3 others of those kind of distributed around the site. Those are all sized as stormwater detention basins. They're all intended to be about 3 feet deep. They have certain capacity. You can see that we've included the numerical square footage of those areas. So that gives you an idea of what the footprint of each of those areas is. If you multiply that footprint by 3, that would be the storage capacity roughly in cubic feet. There's a table in the report. I believe it's in section 1.4, I want to say, that talks about stormwater. There's a table in there that shows you specifically how those things are sized for the given areas, you know, roughly these areas that we're talking about here. And so stormwater could be managed with those 4 stormwater detention BMPs. And a little bit of additional stormwater BMP for the roadway that extends, is that north, Sue? From
Yeah, it's like north, yeah.
roughly north. So in those areas wouldn't drain to the stormwater BMP because they're over the hill, basically the high point. The roadway is built roughly on the high point in the site design. So so that one roadway needs to be managed separately. So we were thinking that you would include probably bioswales there and manage the stormwater that way. One of the things that you could also do, and we should, you know, if you want to take the next step with this, we should probably consider it as part of the next phase of design. You could design and build all these BMPs in advance, or you could phase them in. So the one BMP that I was pointing out, you know, a little while ago, roughly square one, down near, the 3-acre oval, that you'd probably want to build first so that you could accommodate the stormwater from the best development sites. The other ones, maybe you'd want to phase them in, or maybe you'd want to build them first. That's really a cost consideration and how speculative you want to be in terms of, you know, what you think the development potential for the site is, you know, how much you want to get ahead of things. So I think that's pretty much it that we have to say about stormwater at this point. One last thing I will say is that if you guys were able to get an EDA or maybe a one-stop grant, something of that nature, you might want to roll the cost of stormwater infrastructure into that. And so you could potentially get that financed with a grant, or at very least some sort of a low interest loan or some other financial vehicle. And that would help reduce cost to developing this site too. So in real quick summary here, you can use the stormwater BMPs as an opportunity to encourage development in this area. And you may be able to even finance them through public grants or other public financing, and use that again as a way to attract developers. There is one thing I neglected to mention earlier here. We also talk a little bit in the report about having these stormwater BMPs sort of serve dual purposes. So one of the things that you could do in a stormwater BMP potentially, and we like to refer to this as toaster in a bathtub, is that you could potentially do solar voltaic cells floating in the stormwater BMP. Now, I kid about the stormwater in a bathtub thing. This is something, toaster in a bathtub. This is something that has been done before. There's proven technology around it. It's not risky. So that's one thing that you could do that we thought of. Another one would be to make these stormwater detention ponds into more of amenities. So you could set them up essentially like water features, make them kind of into park structures or something like that. That's another good reason to consider putting together the stormwater system ahead of a developer and taking that over for yourself. Because somebody who's coming in as, you know, a developer, tenant, whatever, they're probably not nearly as interested in doing something like that. But you could actually get like a little bit of a benefit out of them that way. So with that, I'll turn it back to you, Sue.
Yeah, I mean, the other benefit too, not just like the cost, like removing the cost of it, is like, even if you permit it ahead of time, like that reduces like the risk and the timing for potential developers. And sometimes that's almost like more important, right? Because the developers want things that are predictable and transparent. So if they already know, like this is already permitted, you know, that at least, you know, kind of helps to sell the site. In addition to stormwater, you know, we do also think that, you know, parking is something that you can look at in terms of the whole site too, because there's like not a ton of really really easy land to develop. You know, maybe looking at the overall site and fitting the parking in, you know, in locations where, you know, you may not have, you know, might have like increased cost to build, like maybe fitting the parking in along the new roadway is another way to, you know, for the city to provide some additional public investment ahead of the development, and that helps them to maximize like their site potential site development. And it's also, you know, it's related to stormwater as well, because if you're building it, like you can do things like pervious pavement, and you know that also like helps to reduce like your need for stormwater. So there's, you know, you know, we think that like it's a good opportunity because the EDIC is involved to look at this as like a sort of a master plan site, and you know, use design and good planning to you know, pre-permit it and reduce complexity and reduce cost. So I'm going to go through a couple more of our graphics, and then I'm going to hand it to Jean to talk a little bit about the market study and the pro forma, and then and then that'll give me a chance to go into the report and pull up some of the tables and things that Jeff had put together as far as like the costs for the public infrastructure. But you know, what we did sort of decide, looking at like the size of these sites, you know, you could get 200,000 to 400,000 square feet of development. The 400,000 is a stretch goal, but not, you know, not infeasible. So those are the numbers that we sort of arrived at and have included in our recommendations.
Sue, would that include parking, or the parking is tight?
So the parking is tight, and that's why we're talking about like, is there an opportunity to do it like within the roadway where you have like, you know, angled parking on both sides of the roadway. I know that the lower Cunnaland Road, it's also tight there. It just, you know, if you do very traditional surface parking on the parcels, then you probably can, you know, the 200,000 is like, you know, a probably more reasonable estimate. But if you know, really go all in on the master planning and, you know, look to design your stormwater as, you know, on a overall site-wide basis, and your parking is, you know, kind of, you know, put in places where, you know, maybe development is less feasible, so you're not taking up prime development land for like lots of surface parking, you know, maybe that's where you can get the 400,000 square feet, we think. My next slide here is a map of the here we go. It's just property ownership information, because I know that another opportunity here, because you do have your, you know, low depth the bedrock, but you also have an owner who has a blasting operation. So that's an opportunity to approach them in terms of like a public-private partnership. You know, that's sort of one of our recommendations for next steps for you guys to like reach out. And I know, you know, we did talk to him, and it sounds like he's interested in, you know, working with you guys, but, you know, might want to bring that conversation to the next level to see if there are, you know, things that the town can do to support it by providing, I don't know, tax incentives to him if he provides like some services that, you know, help to, you know, move the roadway forward. And then these next two, I think we have seen these. Jeff has been in front of you to show you guys what he is thinking as far as proposed wastewater infrastructure. And I know that at a previous meeting, like we had kind of talked about, you know, the fact that the sewer needs to sort of run through an existing neighborhood, and are there opportunities for improving access to that neighborhood while we're doing this work? And Jeff did spend quite a bit of time seeing if that was something that was at all feasible. And because they're different kinds of sewer lines, like the gravity sewer versus the force main, there was not, other than the opportunity to do two projects and only open the ground once, there wasn't a lot of I think additional benefit to doing that, because I know that did come up at a previous meeting. And then the other graphic that I'll share, since we're doing graphics right now, is the water. And Jeff's analysis basically recommends the water tower included in the water infrastructure. I can pull up that section of the report, but he did the cost benefit analysis, and this is what he recommends as the most cost effective way to provide water. So Jean, do you want to talk about your section? Do you need any graphics? Or do you want to just?
I mean, I'll just, the members of the board have seen the report, so I'm not going to belabor too much of it. I did have the opportunity to read through the number of reports that have been done regarding the blue market economy. Some of them were referred to me by the members of the board. Some excellent reports that have been done since going back as far as 2012. And, there's some common themes that come through there, and I don't think they'll come as a surprise to the members of the board. I mean, obviously, the traditional marine industry and the fishing industry, it has struggled and isn't expected to really turn around. So there's a need to really look at different sort of blue economy industries as a way of really strengthening the Gloucester economy. The tourism industry is one that has been growing and unfortunately is not one that generates jobs that pay very well. So I think that the focus has been on, looking at the marine tech and sort of the industries as ones that we could build upon in the Gloucester area, and also maybe looking at the traditional fishing industry and new products as a way of sort of reinventing the, I guess, the fishing industry, and also marine science. The other thing is that I looked at a lot of studies regarding the industrial real estate market in general, which has been very, very strong. I think in an unprecedented position of strength over the last few years. This is not just something that's for the Boston market, but this is a national trend. And even though it's cooled off to some extent, I think the expectation is that the industrial real estate market will continue to be strong. There has been about 2 million square feet of product that has been come on the market in 2022 and 2023. So even though that market is dampened to some extent, there is an expectation that will continue to be something that is in high demand. However, Gloucester is not in the best position to capture some of that demand because of its location, more distant from the city of Boston, more distant from some of the roadway access. It's going to be a situation where trying to look at some of the existing businesses that are in Gloucester is probably going to be the best opportunity to capture some of that growth. We tried to interview representatives from Varian, thinking that this was probably an area that there's the most significant opportunity for capturing new growth. Even though we signed the non-disclosure agreements and reached out to them, unfortunately, we were not able to have an interview with the Varian team. But I do think that this is something that the EDIC members should also follow up with, because of their existence here in Gloucester already. I think, likely demand for new industrial space. I think there's a high likelihood that they could be a candidate for new space in Condolin Road. So one of the problems that exists for the industrial space in Gloucester, and is that, especially in the Condon Road area, is that most of it is older industrial space, approaching 50 years old. It doesn't really meet the modern requirements as far as what industrial users are looking for. They're looking for high bay industrial space, and with good access for trucking. And really there's very limited amount of space that meets those requirements. And what does exist in Gloucester is pretty much located within the Blackburn Industrial Park. There are also other challenges that are associated with the Condon Road. It is probably more remote from access to Route 128, Route 28 than the other locations in Gloucester as well. One of the things that we also looked at was, what about the potential for biomanufacturing businesses? There was a very interesting report that was referred to us regarding the demand for biomanufacturing, which pointed out that Gloucester is actually at no greater distance from Boston than many of the other communities in the Boston regional market. And these are extremely high value, high wage jobs. So this is something that's certainly worth exploring, but I do think that it's going to require some, I think, direct marketing and also outreach with the state of Massachusetts in order to sort of define what specific businesses might be interested in the Condon Road area. The other thing that we need to be mindful of is some of the infrastructure limitations that are associated with this location, which we just heard about from Jim and from Susan as well. Is there going to be enough wastewater capacity? And are the space limitations that might be associated with this location because of the presence of ledge, are those going to be conducive to the type of space that the biomanufacturing industry might be seeking? I don't know if just the pro forma that we performed, we did, this was a conceptual pro forma. Obviously, we don't know exactly what type of a business is going to be able to locate on Condon Road. We don't know what the layout is going to be. So what we did was we did take that sort of best case scenario in terms of the amount of space that might be available. And since we don't know how it could be divided along this Condon Road extension, we just took the best case scenario, 400,000 square feet, and treated it as one warehouse manufacturing space to be constructed. In all likelihood, that's not how Condon Road is going to be developed. In fact, it's highly unlikely that you could fit one 400,000 square foot building given the site constraints on Condon Road. But I think that for the purposes of the pro forma, it still gives you a reflection of what the costs are and what the returns are in terms of the development scenarios. So assuming that you can build 400,000 square feet of warehouse industrial space on Condon Road, we also did some research and talked to developers in the Boston region who have constructed 400,000 square feet of warehouse industrial space in similar locations, albeit not looking at the constraints associated with ledge, and used a construction cost of $130 per square foot. The construction costs range from $120 to $140, but we figured that we were advised that the $130 was probably a good number to use for the Gloucester location. We also, the soft costs that we use in the pro forma were the standard soft costs, and we verified those with the developers and builders. Like I said, as I mentioned, we don't know specifically what the site development costs are going to be, because as Sue mentioned, those site development costs are very variable. In some places you have ledge that's at a very high profile. In other locations you have site development costs that are more reasonable. So we couldn't assign a number, so that we basically treated this site as if it was pad ready and ready to build. The other thing too is that, so even though we used a more favorable conditions in some of those assumptions, we also assumed that this was with no incentives. So even though there are a number of state incentives available that will reduce the cost of capital and that can make this probably a more attractive financing proposition, we didn't take any of those into account. We just treated this as if it was basically conventional financing in terms of the cost of capital and that there were in the cost of debt. The other thing that we didn't factor in, because I think it's something that would have to be negotiated with the city of Gloucester, is the property taxes. As Sue mentioned, some of the properties are privately owned, some of those are owned by the EDIC, and it would have to be verified that the EDIC is in fact tax exempt. The land might indeed be tax exempt for EDIC, but the improvements might be a different situation. That varies from community to community. So for the purposes of the pro forma, we took the worst case scenario and derived a property tax number that was based upon the numbers that we got from the tax assessor for similarly situated industrial properties. And then the other thing that was sort of a worst case scenario too is that we assumed that this was that you were going to have to pay for site acquisition costs, that the land was not free. So this was all treated as if it was a private development scenario. And then we also assumed that the development scenario was going to be that this was going to be constructed by a private developer and that then leased to a third party or parties and not constructed by an owner developer. The lease rates, did a lot of research on what the current lease rates are for modern industrial space in the Boston region, and they range from $12 to $16 per square foot. I mean, this is not what the going rate is for industrial space in Gloucester, but there is no space that's comparable to this in Gloucester, with the exception, I think, of the marijuana facility. So at least this is what we were informed by the tax assessor. So we did try to use a kind of a safe number of a mid-range of $14 per square foot. So hopefully, given the unique aspects of this product, that's a safe number to use. So we worked with Lashinsky Finance and preparing this pro forma, and this is basically what Lashinsky Finance does day in, day out. This is their bread and butter, is the preparation of pro formas. So the pro forma is attached as an appendix, but I'll just give you the highlights. And assumed that the debt financing would be 25% and that equity be 25%. So you're going to have debt financing of about 47 million, equity 15 million, and then the total development cost for the 400,000 square foot building was $63 million. And then using the rents of $14 per square foot and the customary costs, operating costs, and the cost of debt, it was the net effective income range. In year one, it was 6.8 million, and then it ranged to as high as 10.1 million in year 10. So you had free cash flow of 1.1 million year one and 2.4 in year 10. And your debt coverage ratios were acceptable. They ranged from 1.26 in year one to 1.57 in year 10. So even though this is kind of a made up scenario, we know we're not going to have a 400,000 square foot building, you were able to reach the conclusion that you could build a 400,000 square foot modern industrial building and make it work financially, without any sort of incentives from either the city or from the state of Massachusetts. I guess the big, so in the state of Massachusetts, after I talked to Mass Development, they have a number of very attractive programs that are available for industrial development, loan guarantees, industrial revenue bonds, and also marketing assistance, which I think will be very important to try to get tenants for this particular facility. And then the local incentives, it could be tax stabilization, depending upon what the tax status is. And that would just be for their operating costs. We're not talking about any of the capital costs associated with this this project as well. So I think, and then it could be, and obviously, if it were a smaller size building, you could basically change the pro forma. We had some questions from members of the board about what would happen in a phase development. I think you could certainly change the pro forma to phase it in. Let's say you had a 200,000 square foot building. You could certainly revamp the pro forma to reflect that. I don't think your overall conclusions of profitability would necessarily change. If it was a phased development, let's say that it was a 200,000 square foot building and you were leasing it out in 50,000 square foot increments. Obviously, your cash flow is going to change, but that you could certainly adjust it accordingly. I don't think it's going to take you 10 years to lease it out, but maybe you'd be looking at a 5-year lease up versus a 1 to 2 year lease up. But this assumed that there was going to be a 400,000 square foot building, that there was going to be a tenant who was ready to occupy it in its entirety in year 1. So so that was those were the assumptions and those were the conclusions. But I think it was kind of, I guess, a pleasant outcome that you can make a financially viable development here. Now, the other big caveat is that it assumes that all of the site development costs, the roadway, the infrastructure, and everything else is paid for by others, by some sort of a public entity, which I think reinforces some of the points that Sue and Jim made about trying to sort of shift that side of the ledger as much as possible to the public sector. If there's a way of creating public infrastructure associated with stormwater, public infrastructure associated with parking, that just makes this a more attractive and viable site for attracting a developer. Because I think that's going to be important, because you're really talking about a location that has a somewhat speculative nature associated with it.
Right, and the public infrastructure costs for the wastewater infrastructure, the water infrastructure, and the roadway, our estimates got to about 20 million, for those things. That's not including stormwater or any like parking. Like those were not part of that analysis. So that's a number. But Jean did say she had some conversations with EDA, and they were
yeah, I mean,
positive about their ability to fund something like that.
I don't know if you want me to talk a little bit about those conversations I had, Sue, but both Mass Development, and I spoke to a representative from Mass Development. She was very excited about the potential of this development. You talked about the programs that they have, and also that as this develops a little bit more, that they would love to sit down and talk about the programs that could be available for the infrastructure itself. I also met with Deborah Bevan, who's the representative from the US EDA. And once again, there was a lot of enthusiasm, and there is money available through the EDA to pay for the infrastructure costs. As Jim was mentioning, infrastructure can include the stormwater, not just water and sewer and roadway. And it also could even include some of the solar.
Parking.
If you did the toaster in the bathtub approach, or any other sort of solar that might be incorporated. So there, but one caveat with the discussion with the EDA, and I'm sure it's going to be the same situation with Mass Development, is that there needs to be some really concerted outreach to a potential tenant or occupant of this space, because they are not going to commit any sort of public funds on a speculative basis. They want to know that there is indeed serious interest from a company that's going to create jobs in occupying space in this proposed development.
Right. So like Jean said, the conclusions of the report are generally positive, but there's a lot of conditions upon which that positive recommendation lands.
Right.
And, one is working with an existing, or a potential tenant, because that helps to
Yeah.
leverage some of the federal funding and the state funding. Another is, working with the city, to see what resources that they have to bear. So, and then another is like continuing to do some, additional site analysis to see like what those actual what those costs are, and whether the pro forma will still yield the same kind of results once you get a more refined proposed building program.
What's very encouraging though is the sort of eagerness that we heard from representatives from the city, representatives from the state, and also from the federal government about really partnering with you and taking this to the next level. And I think that was very encouraging. We didn't get any sort of anyone trying to dissuade the EDIC from this project at all.
And I do think, Jean, thank you very much. That was a really helpful presentation. I think that a sense of vision and a sense of, where the city would like to grow economically in the future is something that's sort of hasn't been coming out of Gloucester. Most of the focus, Blackburn and Conlin Road, for that matter, has been developed out a number of years ago, and most of the effort has been focused on sort of, maintaining the fishing fleet. So something that's forward-looking and viable manufacturing and industrial space, I think, is and would be well received by both state and federal agencies. Hey, Rob, I don't want to put you on the spot. I just wanted to make sure if you had any questions, especially around Rob and I and Mike Blasio took a look at the pro forma a few weeks ago, and questions around public-private partnership. If you had any questions or comments, I just wanted to give you that opportunity.
Sure. Yeah. And I think it is a good. Performers are always so hard, and you guys did offer the number of caveats. It'd be interesting to figure out over time what kind of financial pressures would Gloucester have to carry to make this attractive, both in terms of infrastructure as well as, while you mentioned there might be state level incentives, what kind of incentives would Gloucester itself have to provide? So there's lots of unknowns there, and there were some other things in the financials that I had questions for in another time. But one of the things that we've talked about at EDIC is what the nature of, and Tom, stop me if you think this is getting off course, but if the city owns the land, is the city just in your analysis, the city just selling the land to a developer or an enterprise, and then their source of revenue going forward is just the possible tax revenue? Or do you envision the possibility of the kind of projects where EDIC or the city continues to become, if not the owner, still a partial owner in not just the underlying land, but the enterprise as well, so that there are revenue, there are income opportunities as an equity owner, and not just as a city who's just getting tax revenue, because that's what I think we're seeing more and more of, where states and cities are saying, I want to have a piece of the action here. I don't want to just be the home where I'm just getting tax receipts, and for that matter, I've got to provide tax incentives up front, so maybe I'm not getting tax receipts for years to come, but rather I'm an equity owner, and I'm part of the revenue stream from whatever the enterprise is. Are you seeing that? Is something like that?
That's a great
like
That's a
this?
great question. I haven't seen it as much on the municipal level, but I know that in the state of Rhode Island, Commerce RI, when they
Yeah.
give tax credits, they basically do participate in the upside.
Yeah, and Maine is
So,
Maine's doing the same
right,
thing.
right.
And
So
they're
they do,
also bringing
right.
private capital to the table to help
Mhm.
with these projects to structure an equity structure that brings private capitals that puts the revenue
Right.
in the hands of both private equity investors, the municipality, as well, of course, as the enterprise.
Right.
Spreads the risk
Um,
a little bit too.
spreads. And I think that, I mean, there's different models. And I think that's, one of the things that we had in one of our early conversations is we think it's very important that the EDIC and also working with the city really refines what your model is going to be going forward. And I think that's because there are different approaches that you can take. I mean, I think one where the EDIC and the city could be basically an equity partner in any sort of development. That's one approach. One where you could actually continue to own the land and then just have like ground leases with developers as well. I will say that if you're going to apply for any of the EDA funds for any of the infrastructure, they will only do it if it's a public or a quasi-public agency applying for those funds. It does not go to a private entity, and they don't like pass-throughs. I can tell you that they can sniff out a pass-through a mile away. So I think that, and they look for the cities and the nonprofit or the quasi to participate in that upside as you're referring to. And that's been my experience with the EDA grants. So I think that looking at different models, like for example, another one I'm familiar with in Rhode Island is the Quonset Development Corporation is a quasi-public entity, and they own the land. They have everything sort of pre-permitted, and then enter into long-term leases with the developers who actually build the improvements themselves.
Yep.
But I think that having that pre-permitted situation with the parking laid out, with the stormwater and other things can be can maybe overcome some of the disadvantages that Gloucester may have right now because of its sort of off the beaten path location, if you will. And that also gives you some of the ability to market it in a more unique way and to control the destiny of this development. Because it's also important that you get high value industrial uses. You don't want some storage things in there. You want something that's going to generate the types of jobs that are going to affect the trajectory of the city in the future too. So I think that's where you were talking about the vision of Gloucester and making sure that this is a development that really contributes to that is important.
Yeah, I think that like part of what we're trying to say, right? Like this is not easy, like, okay, just put it on the market and it'll, work itself out. Like it needs like a local champion because it's complicated. I mean, that's not to say that it couldn't be a great opportunity, but it's not one that will be easy and kind of take care of itself. It will need a local champion. It will need some creative approaches to financing and, how it's, like she's saying, pre-permitted, designed, and even how like how it operates in the future.
And one of the things too is that mass development, when I spoke to Keith Romani, who's your Northern Massachusetts representative, said she was really excited about this and was talking very creatively. They have different real estate marketing tools. She was also talking about trying to create something that would have the job training component as well. So really looking at it in a very comprehensive way, I think could make this project, emerge as something that attracts the notice of federal and state agencies and gets everyone in the community excited, so that you may be the initial champions, but then everybody wants to sort of be associated with something that's exciting and successful.
Well, Jeannie,
Yeah, that kind of approach has the potential to help you market it, like
True.
it's part of the marketing on your behalf.
well, that's where the private sector comes in, because they're much better at
Mhm.
marketing. And if they've got a
Right.
seat at the table and can participate as equity owners as well, they're brilliant marketers, far better than what, at least, I mean, this sounds awful, what happens at a municipal level.
True.
You know, you mentioned Rhode Island. I mean, this is where Jeannie Raimondo made her mark, and that's why she's Commerce Secretary, I guess. But you wonder if in that capacity, her department can provide consulting services, you know, as because you mentioned federal government involvement, because she was the key to making it work in Rhode Island. She figured out the formula. And if there's a way to leverage some of that expertise on a free consulting basis.
Well, the EDA
She's in
is
China right
part
now.
of, the Economic Development
back.
Administration is part of the Commerce Department. So that is her department. So
Great.
so that is the agency that you'd be tapping into on the federal level. And Ms. Bevan also talked about the possibility of tapping into some job training dollars. I guess the state of Massachusetts got a huge grant for job training. And she was saying, don't forget about that and make sure that Gloucester gets its piece of it too. So like I said, I think you've got some people who could be your kind of champions on other levels of government as well.
Thank you.
And just in terms of any city incentives too, when we spoke to tax assessor and the planning director and the economic development director, they brought up the potential of tax increment financing. Now, this might get a little tricky if the land is municipally owned by the EDIC, but you're going to get new taxes from the improvements. So this is where that would have to be kind of structured carefully so that whatever taxes are generated might be able to pay for tax increment financing bonds for the infrastructure improvements. On the other hand, it's always a balancing act between, do you abate the taxes so that it's more attractive to the developers and yet their operating costs are lower, or do you pay the taxes so that you've got something to pay for the infrastructure costs? I kind of think, since, although that was a pretend pro forma in some ways, because it's 400,000 square feet and we know you can't build that in one chunk, but if you've got very high infrastructure costs, maybe infrastructure is more of a problem than operating costs in this particular situation. But this is something that needs to be investigated with more specificity in the next phase. That would be my initial thoughts on it.
When you just brought up the educational piece, one thing I don't know how or where you are is that we have a biotech academy here in Gloucester. And with a partnership like that, I think that we could be very interesting to biotech industries by being able to provide a workforce for them.
That's a great point. And I think maybe even building on that and expanding it to other industries that might be attracted to this location, because one of the things that came up in all of those reports about Condolin Road and was the concerns about workforce. And this is something that also comes up not just for Gloucester, but for most locations in the Northeast, is concerns about workforce. So that can give you that.
I don't think those academies are that common, are they?
No, they're not. And I think that having academies that are kind of directed by the private sector, I think the point that was made earlier, that the private sector, I think, has a much better understanding of what their needs are. And if you sort of expanded that concept, but I do think that this is something that was brought up by both the person from Mass development and also from the person from the US EDA. They're, I think, absolutely on the same page with you.
But I do think, right, Jean, like that's a great potential, but it still comes down to like identifying a tenant. I do think
Yeah.
just operating on speculation isn't what we would recommend that you do. We think that that's an important next step, particularly to have conversations with the two businesses in town that have that, that are existing and have like, articulated a need for expansion. Those are probably a very good starting point, but it's not like you were saying, like your conversations with the funders, like it's not if you build it, they will come. It's that you need, that private partnership is sort of one of the integral first steps to getting this moving.
Yeah. Yeah. So
That
if
was kind of one of my questions, maybe to Jean or Susan, is kind of with this now that we have, what would be the order of operations? Are we looking to identify a tenant, then go back to the EDA and mass econ? Are we looking to sit down with EDA and mass econ and have them help steer? Are we looking to, do we sign on with you again to say, hey, these are the order operations. This is what these are benchmarks you need to hit. Like, what are, we have a lot of information here. Not the smartest guys in the room, barring Rob, maybe
Definitely.
Gerald, but Tom and I, we're different industries. So, it's a big project. So what is the best way to leverage this information to maximize kind of like the next step? And, not rolling into another study or doing this, but like, who do we sit down with and say, hey, you're interested, Rob, what you said, maybe we go private, someone private. Is it important to sit down with Applied Materials and get them to like sign on? Is it important to find someone to sign on with us, like a private person? Do we stay with developing it first?
I think it's kind of,
Jean said
I think
you
it's,
can't have like a pass through. We can't just say, oh, we're going to develop it for Applied and get
No,
a bunch
but
of
you
funding.
can, but I think what she was saying by that, like that, there's a couple of different things, and Jean, you will be answer this better than I, but like from just like stepping back a second, like we have recommendations, in the report, but I think you were looking for something a little more of like, what do we do first? And like, there's a couple of
I'm like
things.
spinning my wheels.
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple of things that I think you need to do kind of at the same time.
yeah.
Having discussions within the EDIC and also with the town, to see like what the options are, because the pass-through isn't okay, but if you come up with an ownership model where it's the EDIC or the town that ends up owning the park, like the new Condon Road Park, right, Jean, like that's an option for having them fund the public infrastructure, because then you're funding the public infrastructure and the park is owned by a public entity, and that will be okay.
Yeah. I mean, I do think that it is sort of an all of the above, as Sue was mentioning. I think there's like maybe three or four things that you should do at once. I think that probably maybe since I come from a municipal background, maybe talk to the town. Like definitely the city rather. The cities don't like, in my experience, cities don't like, they don't like surprises. They don't want to hear from somebody at the state that you talk to them and they don't know about it.
Right.
So at least any mayor I worked for got very mad about that. So I would say maybe talk to the city. I also think that talking to the state, maybe shortly thereafter, but with the knowledge of the city, maybe you go together with the city and sharing this report. And then I also think that maybe after that, then you've got the sort of the buy-in, assume that you've got the buy-in of the city and the state. And then that gives you a little bit more heft, I guess, when you reach out to Varian and to the others and say, listen, we've got this report. The city and the state love this. We'd like to talk to you about your interest in maybe developing here. The other thing too is that you might have a delegation that goes and meets with them. It's yourselves and somebody from the city and the state, and the state may have some marketing assistance. I would say probably after those steps, then you pull in the EDA folks. but I would say kind of start on those sort of local steps first. And then take it from there, because hopefully you don't get any unpleasant surprises. That's
Speaking of
sometimes that
that,
happens.
I have another question which relates to some of the other work we're doing. Did you look at all at the state of the electric grid infrastructure?
Right.
Jerry, you just killed it.
No.
That's
So-
really my question.
Thirty-
I mean,
Yeah.
It's gonna be the
Now we're looking
candlelit
at 2030.
industrial park.
Yeah, so we did have the Daymark report, and it was pretty bleak what it said.
it is. It is. Yeah.
So we did, all right, so we did look at it, and I don't, and we can, take the 400,000 and look at, some of the power needs for the, uses, and there are actually fairly significant differences into the power needs of like a typical industrial use versus a biotech. So that's something to keep in mind, even though it's like probably a great, idea to push that because of the cachet. Like it requires a lot of power and a lot of water. So just something to keep in mind. This isn't, I mean, if you have to address like electrical infrastructure as part of this might make the whole project infeasible.
Well,
But, I know that.
Probably do. So one question I would have, not this minute, but as we talk about this, is what is the range? And you just expressed two, I guess, relative extremes in terms of uses, in terms of cost. So what is that cost range? Is either one of them doable, or is there a policy option? I mean, the Daymark report talked about the first mover problem. I mean, is there any
Right.
why the developer has to pay these costs? The whole
Right.
the whole city benefits from what happens there. So is that something that should be?
I mean, from the
Mhm.
reading of the report, like there wasn't room for anything. I mean, like it was very, very like clear that it did not identify any additional capacity
No,
to work
that's not the question. I think
Oh,
that answer is pretty clear.
Who pays
The
for
question
it?
is how do you,
Oh,
the question,
all
how
right.
do you get the extra capacity and who pays?
Yeah.
Who pays
right.
for
And
it?
So
so
that
the
might
report-
be based on ownership
Yeah.
model, right?
Well,
So
it's the big issue there that Daymark pointed out is that it depends on grids policy, which is overseen by a public agency, the DPU, about who they expect to pay for the improvements.
Yeah. I mean, it's not just a Gloucester problem either. Like
The tragedy of the commons.
Yeah, I mean, it's
Exactly.
not just Gloucester, it's the whole, it's the whole area that like, can't do any development.
Well, it's National Grid, to be specific about it. It's National Grid and Eversource don't approach the problem the same way. So there's some leverage opportunities there, perhaps from a policy perspective.
Yeah,
But
I mean, we did
it's-
also look a little bit at solar. That doesn't solve the problem, right? Like you can't, you can't just say like, okay, we're just gonna solve it all with solar. But it does, that's an opportunity also, to kind of talk about them with. So that, I mean, those are outside of all these next steps, like, yeah, I mean, that's the elephant in the room. Like there needs to be, I think, and that's not the EDIC. I don't know that the EDIC is going to be able to make that, have that conversation. Like that's a
Not by
conversation.
itself. I mean, what we're
Yeah.
looking at is the potential for EDIC to get something on a regional or maybe national grid-wide
Yeah,
basis. There's some big changes in policy that have to happen in order to make projects like this work economically.
yeah. I mean, from the report, it's not just like, okay, spend a little bit extra money to add some additional capacity. It's like a big, like, number to, increase to build the infrastructure at all. Like it was.
That's right. And in some ways it comes
Yeah.
at the worst possible time because as the filing that National Grid just made about what it's planning to do, it's planning to do all kinds of things, probably not enough, to make electric vehicles possible, to make electrification of buildings possible. It's nothing there about economic development, but that by itself is going to be costly. So it's not a moment in time when people are looking for something else to spend money on.
So
I don't. Go ahead.
The one thing that I would throw out as a potential opportunity there is that when those kind of costs creep in and you have to address those sorts of things, there are often public sources of funding that become available to help deal with it. So maybe, you know, if this gets approached properly, there's a way to finance the electrical improvements that you need out there, maybe as part of doing something else, you know?
Yeah, no, I think that's a very good point. And there is money out there, but as you might expect, with electrification happening, especially, there's a lot of other folks interested in it. So there's going to be a lot of competition for it.
Competitive. Yep.
The other thing I wanted to add, and I agree that the energy issue in Gloucester or Cape Ann region is bleak. You know, per this new draft plan by National Grid that we haven't fully evaluated yet, but you know, they will put in a new feeder station in West Gloucester in 2033. At least that's their initial plan. I mean, I don't know how long, if we were to pursue the development of what we just talked about on Condolen Road, but really, you know, 8 to 10 years, you know, it's probably, it may take that long from site development and all of the infrastructure improvements. So, you know, thinking on a 10-year horizon associated with this new capacity in West Gloucester doesn't answer Jerry's point about the fact that you still then need to get and pay for that new capacity to get to Condolen Road. But nonetheless, I think thinking on that 10-year time frame contributes to this idea of master planning for economic development. Let's, you know, make all this happen in what is probably a likely time phase. It's not going to happen in probably 3 to 5 years.
Well, I think that's right. And I think you're right to suggest that it's an opportunity for us to stick our foot or both feet or all of our feet in the door. But that's about as far as it goes. The planning that Grid is doing, as near as I can tell from the brief look I've taken, has nothing to do with economic development. It's got to do with meeting mandates that are already in place for electrification, primarily for vehicles. That's it. And so, and they've already demonstrated pretty clearly, I think, their unwillingness to do more than they absolutely have to. So that's the big debate that we have to take on. And it's a good forum. I mean, in a way, we're lucky. The fact that they are already planning for something means that we have an opportunity to bolt onto that planning some very important other things.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's
Well,
similar to the wastewater that we have an opportunity right now to be part of something. So I mean, it is good to keep pushing this forward. I think no matter what, if we were ready to start putting foundations in a year, it wouldn't speed Grid up at all, right? Even if we had someone willing to pay for it, they'd still say, great, 20, what is it? What did you say, Tom? 2033?
2030.
No, but I'm not,
There we go.
I don't know this yet, but I doubt that what they're planning to do in 2033 is going to help us at all on Condolen Road. So
Right, but that's why
that has to change.
it's good to get ahead of it. So when they're doing work, you know, if they're laying whatever they're laying, cutting trees down and laying new wire, they lay bigger, better wire. Plan ahead.
Well, it
instead
may
of
be
just eating
that
expected
simple.
capacity.
It may be that simple. It may be that a lot more than that is necessary. But whatever it is, that we need more advice than we have. Daymark's probably a good candidate for some of that. We need somebody to figure out how much power the various options on Condolen Road are required,
Right.
for example, just to get a sense of the potential economic development growth that there is in Gloucester.
And
Well, I think you guys probably,
Jim, you had some stuff in your report, didn't you? What would be expected, or maybe that was water usage. I thought there was something.
Yes, I think it was
some
water.
information about
there's
the
water and stormwater.
Water and sewer. Yeah, but yeah, so it would be important to know if does that like rule out biotech or something? Or does it make it so that you can only have one biotech building? Yeah, I think that is important.
Well,
So I think one thing to consider is, you know, the whole state is going electric, you know. There's a national move to go electric, and right now there's the stretch code and then the enhanced stretch code that's going to kick in. The idea being to get everybody on the grid so that everybody can have access to green power sources, and we get away from fossil fuel. That's going to require upgrading upgrading electrical systems and services everywhere. And the idea is to do that, like I think we were saying, 2023.
But that's what Grid's plan is about. And the problem is that that's all that. And so it's leaving economic development out. And it looks to me like they just plan to continue doing this same old thing they've been doing, which is making the first mover pay for any expansion beyond that. So that's what we have to take on.
So I want to be respectful of everybody's time, including my own. I don't know, Sue, if you've got any sort of last thoughts or comments. Obviously, we need to spend some time with this report. I certainly regard this as the final report, but if we have any questions that need clarification, I'm assuming that's fine. But
yeah, there's actually one section that I hadn't finished. It's highlighted that we're gonna we'll flesh out a little bit, but yeah, it's other than that, it's final. And so if you do have any comments, let us know, and we'll put those in there.
Yeah, and I mean, right now we're as a board struggling with really the focus this fall is going to be this energy issue. But we, I think, also want to take this good study and start to have conversations with other key stakeholders, make sure they're aware of it, and begin to sort of develop a strategy or a process for, what might our model be or how do we want to move forward. So I think that's the plan. And thank you very much for your efforts in helping us think about what's certainly not a easy to develop site, but perhaps the lowest hanging piece of granite in Gloucester. Anyways, any other last questions for the Weston Sampson team?
No, I'm good for now. I'm sure we'll come up with a small list when we finally have time to.
Yeah, and just, I assume, Tom, you can collect the comments and send them all at once. Just, might work easier that way. Yeah.
No. We're going to come up with like 6 different people. Just
that's great. Yeah.
Text messages, the whole mess. No, we'll keep it concise.
Okay.
So on other EDIC fronts, so Weston and Sampson team, you guys, again, thank you very much.
All right.
Guys are welcome.
Thank you guys. Pleasure working with you.
Yeah.
Bye-bye. Thanks, everybody.
Great fun.
Okay. Bye-bye. Bye.
Just very quickly on a couple other fronts. So one, since we do now have a quorum, as we go back to the meeting minutes, I don't know if you had a chance to review any corrections, edits to that document. Okay. All in favor to approve the July meeting minutes? So moved. Okay. Jerry, we talked about talking about the energy stuff, but we've sort of talked about it just now. I don't know if you want to add anything else.
Well, I think we really did just hit the high points. They're talking about, Grid is talking about in the North Shore area, which is us. They're talking about doubling or tripling the load. It's a little hard to make it out from their conflicting numbers. Between now and 2034, and that's just for fairly
for cars.
It's for increasing the saturation of EVs to 43%. That's probably plausible. Might be a little aggressive even, but they're only talking about a 30% penetration of building electrification for that. I don't think that's enough to meet the state goals. So I think there's probably going to be more pressure on them to figure out a way to do more. So that means even more than what they're now planning just to do the electrification.
So the electrification is tailored cars and like the heating cooling units, the electric heating cooling units as well.
That's right. Yeah, and actually, the truth is the heating is the bigger problem because a lot of EV charging is going to happen off peak. So the big problem is meeting the peak, and the heating load, electric heating load, is eventually going to be the peak. So that's really the pressure that's going to be on them. And I've only very lightly skimmed the report, and I didn't see a lot of recognition of that. But I think that's going to be, in a way, a competitor for infrastructure dollars.
Yeah,
to economic development.
No, I haven't looked at it carefully as well, but there is a nice chart that shows about 10 years from now where heating, the load splits. So right now, high electric loads are in the summer and low in the winter. And in about 10 years, it's going to absolutely just flip. So as electric dual splits are used for heating purposes.
Yeah, that's right. But it's gonna be at a much higher level than it's at today. That's the problem for the grid. And actually,
So,
the fact the winter is a problem because right now they're prepared for a summer peak, not a winter peak. So they're going to have to beef up their winter peak capacity.
Well, it's just silly because, you know, summer storm. So, my AC went out, so I have to get a glass of ice water. What happens when everyone's heat goes out for days at a time? And that's the worst way. Like, I know that I can still heat my house, you know?
Maybe a good time to go into the wood business.
Yeah, I know exactly. Multi-fuel. I have wood,
Right.
natural gas, got it all.
Yeah, that's a very good point. I think there's a lot of questions about how fast heating electrification is going to move. For that reason, Grid does point out the fact that the saturation of oil heat around here is relatively low. The economics of switching from oil to electric are much better than the economics of switching from gas, which is by far the predominant fuel here. So there's going to be a lot of resistance just on economic grounds. So there's a lot of really tough questions on that. But
so we will be looking at the report, and then Jerry and I and Rob and certainly include everybody in the loop in terms of what probably our ask is to Daymark or somebody else, so we can understand what is or isn't in the plan as it relates to Gloucester and Cape Ann. And so obviously that needs to happen over the next month, essentially.
Just to get you all thinking about it, I see two things where we need help. One is what you just mentioned. Daymark can help us in figuring out what is and is not in the plan. What's there that shouldn't be, what's not there that should be, all that kind of stuff. And they'll take on the first mover problem happily, I think. And they will probably, I think they're the right guys to help us figure out what a plausible growth path for electrification is around here, both for vehicles and for buildings. But that leaves out what we're concerned about, which is economic development. So we need somebody to help us figure out what the potential is. Start with Conlon Road. What would we need by way of capacity and where in order to make that possible? But who else is planning or thinking about planning so that we can present? I mean, ultimately, we're going to have to present to somebody, initially Grid. Ultimately, if we're not lucky, we'll have to go to the DPU with it. We're going to have to say, look, here's the economic development that could happen if Grid is prepared for it. They're not. That's Daymark's piece of it. But here's what's possible. That's for somebody else to tell us what's going on in the region.
I think the numbers, like those numbers are in the Weston Sampson report. They're on like page 2-7. But I think we should have Daymark look at that because it just like laboratory space. It was just kilowatt hours per square foot. Maybe that was
well, that would help. I mean, only load shapes too and that kind of stuff. But I'll take a look at that too. But that's that's just the beginning, because Condon Road isn't the only project we want to see happen.
Right.
So we need to,
To give Daymark that whole, at least more ammo for, we're trying to develop
yeah.
a million square feet, not 400,000 square feet. And this is what we're gonna need for power. For
Yeah.
high end, we want, we don't want warehouse space, we want laboratory space or whatever. So,
Well, right.
just-
So, and it may be if we could provide enough information about what people are thinking about to Daymark, somebody's thinking about lab space, somebody's thinking about some other kinds of industrial space, and perhaps Daymark with that relatively small amount of survey information could give us some reasonable projection of what could happen if the power were there.
Yeah.
Something like that. I mean, that's the case we need to put together, I think.
So
Okay.
I'd like to raise one last quick issue before we cease. Suzanne Egan, the city councilor, or city legal counsel, reached out to me yesterday because
What'd you do?
so Hiltz has applied to Mass DEP to expand the site on Condon Road to be a regional waste transfer station. And so there is initiated a 21-day comment period on that request. And so the city will be making comments. And the question is whether we want to be a party to the city's comments or we want to make our own comments. Truthfully, I don't know enough facts yet about the issue to share with you and form an opinion. I think I remember we talked about this probably 4 or 5 months ago, and I thought that they'd gotten a lot of pushback from local boards that it looked questionable, but there are concerns about Condon Road basically being, a site transfer location for various towns on the North Shore, and all of the increased, dump trucks, garbage trucks that would be on Magnolia Ave or wherever in and out the region. So I'm pretty sure the city will not be in favor of it, but I'm not exactly sure what their arguments are going to be.
The company that runs Hiltz is out of Connecticut. The company that bought Hiltz, and so far they're like out of compliance with everything. Like the fact that they're applying to expand, it's like you're not even doing what you're supposed to be doing, like what you're permitted to do correctly. So why do you want to take on more? I think it would be a nightmare. The city is not backing it at all.
I think that's a really big piece of the document. That's really important.
Yeah, we should talk to someone in the city. We could start with Sal. I'm sure Sal or Jill knows.
Who in the city sort of owns this issue? Is it?
Probably Board of Health, building, zoning.
Well, ultimately, it'll be
right.
a legal filing at this point. So Suzanne Egan will obviously speak to those other boards, but she'll craft, the letter of opposition or the comment letter to the Mass DEP.
So I think the other more parochial concern for us is what impact would that have on Condon Road and its attractiveness for expansion and that kind of thing.
Yeah,
I would assume.
That's right. I mean, we're spending time and effort in the last hour and a half talking about a vision for Condon Road that is better, higher paying jobs and growth industries, not low-paying automated garbage services.
Landfill.
I feel exactly the same way. But that has to be raised. I don't envy Suzanne having to make the NIMBY argument, but that's really what we have to do.
Right. So I'll be back in touch on after I talk with Suzanne, and but I'm assuming that this group is okay with us being a party to a letter that would voice concerns about that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
Let's just have a vote just so that it's on record as I make a motion that we will be a potential party with the city in filing a letter of opposition to Hiltz's expansion.
Tom, you got the vote thing before you made the motion.
Yeah. Nobody's listening at the moment anyway, so.
That's good.
All right, I think we're adjourned. It's
All right.
probably down to about 105 degrees here in Arizona, so
Oh, you lucky you.
put my head outside. All right, we'll see you all soon.
All right.
See you guys.
All right, bye guys.
Have a good one.
Thank you.